May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Cuke Audio Podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, doing our bit to help preserve the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want, within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. Let's see. I'm not sure what to call or what's the topic of what I want to talk about, but I'd say this is a comments on the Shunryu Suzuki lecture excerpts. And, I read through his lectures many times, and, I made these lecture excerpts for years and years. And then a few years ago, Peter Ford took that over and does a much better job. I mean, I was just putting it on Blogger. And then he did a thing where it would go on to Facebook, Cuke Archives. But then he started putting it on Instagram at Katrinka's suggestion. Actually, she kept suggesting it, and we resisted. But then he started putting them up with an image. So that was really good, and he keeps doing it. He does it every day. And it also is on Cuke Daily Blog. You can find it by going to cuke.com and hitting What's New. And that it goes to Facebook Cuke Archives and to Blue Sky Cuke Archives and to the email list of people who want them in the email. And a lot more every day. So I read those every day. And it's like, generally it's like hearing it for the first time, everything. I go, oh, wow, yeah, that's a good point. Or, really, he said that? I think sometimes in some of them I read is, oh, well, that's just his opinion, or that's such sort of a culturally biased thing. And there's other times I think, oh, wow, nobody's going to understand what he means by that. But so I'm sort of, right now I'm thinking of dividing it into sort of those three groups. Now, let me read the lecture excerpt that came up today. Without a medium, it is impossible to get contact with pure mind, or even an inmost request. Without some means, it is impossible to express your inmost nature. Everyday life is also the expression of inmost nature, but our everyday life is too dualistic. So, in everyday life, it is almost impossible to study inmost nature. Only in a Zendo is it possible to study inmost nature. And if you get accustomed to this kind of life, you can apply this way in your everyday life so that you may not be bothered by the duality of the world. So, when I read that, I thought, oh, that's perfect. That is really good. That is a good sort of universal type message that at least people who are somewhat familiar with, Buddhism or practice or something will understand and can read it and think about it. One thing that does occur to me is that you will notice if you keep following him, is that he will say contradictory things. So like in the phrase here, only in a Zendo is it possible to study inmost nature. Well, Yeah, but, like when Peg Anderson said to him, my way is the way of tea. He said something like, we can't depend on Zazen or something, he supported her. And he moved out of only in the Zendo is it possible to study inmost nature. It's good to remember that Peg Anderson was a serious Zen student who sat at the Los Altos Zendo. When we look at the quote, the way I read it, I'd call it the restrictive understanding of what the word Zendo, doing Zazen in the Zendo, is. When he talked to her, it was a much more open understanding, like her Zendo was in her tea practice, but also her whole life, because she was also involved with, the Los Altos Zendo. And often people who came to him with unusual practices, if he found they were sincere, he'd support it. That was the main thing, if he saw sincerity. You got to remember, everything he says, there's another side. Incidentally, that exchange is in one of the books. Zen is right here, and Zen is right now. If you don't take things rigidly and you read it, that makes a lot of sense. And that's a statement of his that is very dharmic, right? But there are other types of lecture excerpts posts. Right, this is an excerpt from just a few days ago. SR colon, which means Suzuki Roshi, right? So Suzuki Roshi. When you pass a monastery officer's seat, you have to bow. Student, do you bow even if he is not sitting there? Suzuki Roshi, even when he is not there, you should bow. We call them pure rules. Pure rules are not dualistic rules. Pure rules are absolute rules, and it is not a matter of to obey or not to obey. You have to just do it. As you practice Zazen, you just sit. That is Zazen. So I found it interesting. There's a student that asks, do you bow even if he's not sitting there? Because this has nothing to do with Zen Center practice or the practice, well, in the specific example. Nothing to do with the practice at Zen Center as he established it. Now, and also as Kobun Chino did, I would imagine it was Kobun Chino who told us but it might have been earlier. It might have been an old practice at Zen Center. When we passed Suzuki's seat on the altar, he's sitting there, we would bow to him. If there's some reason you're going by, you bow to him, take a lot of time, you just bow. He was sitting at the end of the aisle. The left aisle, if you're facing the altar, and up on the altar platform. Only maybe in some ceremony would you go up there and then cross in front of him and come back. The only time I can think of is if you're going to pick up the kyosaku, the stick, and then you'd go over and bow to him. So if he's not there, you'd bow to him anyway, all right? That's the only person. That's the only time that practice, that rule, it wasn't really a rule, it was just a practice. The only time it happened at Zen Center. So what's this about? When you pass a monastery officer's seat, you have to bow. Now, somebody reading this, they don't know. But they assume he's talking about at Zen Center or at Tassajara. They go, wow, every time, how many officers are you? You got to bow every time you go by the I don't want to do that. That's ridiculous. And listen, I got some messages about that. What's that about? Well, he's obviously talking about Dogen's rules for 800 years ago. for Eiheiji Monastery. And his point is not that we should do that when you go into a monastery or a temple or whatever, just do what they do. You don't have to do what they do when you're outside of it, but when you're there, just follow the rules, follow the practice. Think of it this way. If you went into training to be a dancer and you had a strict dance teacher that, laid out certain ways of conduct for people when they arrive there, it's all about becoming a good dancer. So if you're going to be a good dancer, you're going to do whatever they tell you. Some things might not make sense right now, but they say, you keep doing this, you'll understand, and you'll become a good dancer, And in terms of art, I've found if we think of these things in terms of art, or dance, or, ballet or something, you can see it's not so offensive to think of following rules that don't make sense to you. I mean, you wanted to learn, you wanted to study with this teacher at this dance school, so just do what they say. Now, if they're being offensive or abusive to students, that sort of thing, can really make one leave, not go along with that, and that does happen. But anyway, so you see, we put up, and I did the same thing, put up quotes from a Suzuki lecture that a lot of Zen students didn't understand. It doesn't give any context, And I know Peter's not like me. I'm sort of mischievous. I just sort of laugh and I'll think, nobody's going to understand this, And I sort of like confusion. But you know who I get that from? Shunryu Suzuki. It was amazing, the amount of confusion and chaos, on a lower level, he would put up with and not try to solve. He basically, and one good example is distractions in the Zendo. He didn't want to hear people complain about the distraction. He wanted them to be able to sit regardless of a distraction. I had a good experience in a Vipassana retreat in Bali. It was a woman teacher. She was a renegade Vipassana teacher that, she had the right connections with the right Myanmar people or whatever to become a teacher, which isn't done. There's no way for women to rise to the top in Theravada. But there is in America. But anyway, I really enjoyed sitting that Vipassana retreat with her. The others have done, we'd meet, a group of us would meet with the monk, and they were always Myanmar monks. Although there are other types of Vipassana retreats done in Bali by visiting teachers, isn't there? She wouldn't do it. She said she didn't meet with students as a group, or they were just there to sit, and she'd give a talk, in the evening. We're all just here to sit and walk together. And why? She said, because people ask irrelevant questions and complain about things. They don't ask practice-oriented questions. They don't, and she was tired of it. So, when she was giving a talk, a woman raised her hand. European woman, you wouldn't hear a Balinese or Indonesian person doing this. She said that she worked very hard every period to get as high as she could, or, to get as deep as she could in her meditation. And it usually took her until almost the end of the period to get to a deep place. And, this man walked in, and that was the woman's place to sit. Now, I have been in where men and women would sit, like one side and the other. But this whole building was all women. And she said, I put my arms, across my arms, meaning no entrance. And he didn't pay attention. And I said, there's no guests here. This is only for people in the retreat and only women. And he said, I won't bother you, and sat down. He was just, there's a lot of visitors come to that temple, Brahma Vihara Rama in northern Bali. I just drove her nuts. And she said, he just ruined my meditation for the whole period. And for hours after that, she was really upset. And the teacher's answer was, you should be grateful to him. He showed you how weak your meditation is. You should thank him. You should bow to him. Something like that. Oh, I loved that. And then I raised my hand to be next. And she said, yeah. I said, thank you for the last answer. Okay, here's another category. This is what I would call, like I mentioned before, where you can see his assumptions, something like that from his own culture, from what he knows. But it's not just that. He might, if you nailed him down, if you talked to him afterwards about how accurate his example was, we might just agree with you. Yes, it's more nuanced, more complicated than that. But he was just making a point. It's not whether the example he uses is accurate or not. It's what was his point at the bottom of it. So I just read a quote and I gave it to ChatGPT and asked it what it thought. It right away recognized it was Suzuki. And because there was nothing there, it was just the quote. Now, one thing is ChatGPT does have memory that I tell it to have, to remember something. You don't want to try to use it to remember everything. It doesn't have that much memory. So it does know I'm involved with Suzuki, so it probably just jumped to that. You'll hear its first response, and then I ask it a question, and then his next one. So his first response is sort of understanding it, how he meant people to understand it. And the second one is looking at the validity of the example. So here we go. This is also from not long ago. Just to respond to some outward stimulation is not right. That is to behave just like animal-like laughs. That is not what we mean by to be natural. To be natural means to follow the pattern of human life, not natural life. We make a clear distinction from animal life. Natural as a human being or natural as an animal. If someone hits you, you hit back is an animal-like response. You should remember your true inmost nature. So, that comment expresses a deeply Buddhist and specifically Zen view, likely from Shunryu Suzuki or someone in his lineage. It distinguishes between instinctive reaction and conscious response. The idea is that to be natural in the human sense means not to be ruled by impulses, but to act in accord with awareness and compassion, what Suzuki might call our true nature. Reacting automatically, as when someone hits you, you hit back, is seen as an animal-like response, whereas remembering one's inmost nature means pausing, being present, and allowing a response to arise from mindfulness rather than reflex. It's not denying that humans are animals, but making a moral and spiritual distinction. The natural life of a human being includes reflection and empathy, not mere survival reaction. Okay, then I say, but is that really the animal response? One response? And it says, that's a perceptive question, and you're right to question it. Very typical ChatGPT answer. This statement oversimplifies animal behavior. In reality, animals don't all react in one uniform way. Some fight back, some flee, some freeze, some show submission, or even avoid conflict entirely. Many social animals also display restraint, empathy, and cooperation that blur the lines Suzuki is drawing. So while the teaching works symbolically, contrasting reactive habit with mindful awareness, it's not literally accurate as a statement about animals. It's a pedagogical contrast, not an ethological one. He's using animal-like metaphorically to mean unexamined impulse, not describing how animals truly behave. So I think that's something we should think about. Well, we should always look at our assumptions, and that includes what he says. What's the essence? What's he saying? Is he really saying this about animals? No. He's talking about not letting our impulses rule us. So I'll leave it at that. I think you get my point. In Shunryu Suzuki lectures, the core of it is the points about dharma and practice. Watch out about taking things literally. That's always the problem with religion. Your mind will know how to take it in. One thing, that group of lectures he gave at Marion Derby's were so clear and basic, and they brought us in my beginner's mind. But he also was giving lectures on the Blue Cliff Records in the city. I think focusing what he's saying on a more experienced group of people who've been with him longer than in Los Altos. And he would make dharmic points there, but they were a little more esoteric. And then at Tassajara, he would give, your pure dharmic type talk, but he would give talks that had to do with practicing at Tassajara, or he would go through like all the Lotus Sutra stuff, reading and talking about it, because he wanted us to understand the breadth of Buddhist scripture. It's not all chop wood, carry water stuff. So and sometimes he give a talk like where he's explaining how we do something and relating it to some ancient practice. The point wasn't the ancient practice. It was, look for the core, look for what he's trying to say there. Another thing I've noticed is Michael Winger said once, I've quoted him many times, he said, it seems like Suzuki Roshi was just like shooting arrows into the distance and hoping one of them lands well. Yeah, he tried many, many approaches. There's a tremendous amount of contradiction and paradox in it. In terms of rules, for that thing I was talking about where he's saying you just do it, he was very lax on rules. He was very understanding. My God, he was no disciplinarian at all. He would talk about the importance of it and be an inspiring example. But when people would come to him with some heretical approach they'd done, like when Bob Walters sat the 100-day sesshin, which, went completely against the sort of practice of zazen that Suzuki taught. Suzuki would say, you don't need to sit too much, just, what we're doing here is enough, and then a sesshin once or twice a year, that's enough. Incidentally, Ramana Maharshi said the same thing. Meister Eckhart said the same thing. Don't just spend all your time meditating. Get up and do something. But anyway, when Bob Walters did that, and everybody thought, but basically it was Zen Center heresy. Suzuki was dying to hear from him what his experience was like, and then sort of acknowledged that he had a certain amount of awakening and advised him how to use it. There's a lot of examples of that, where they just go completely against what we assumed was his way. He had no particular way. He had no particular teaching, and it was expressed in particulars. Here I am at Johanneshof in Germany, Dharma Sangha's retreat in the Black Forest, where I've had a wonderful time. And with Katrinka here, she's down working in the kitchen now. And we're going to eat a quick lunch, and then Andrea, the director, is going to drive me to the airport to pick up my sister and niece. And I haven't seen my sister and my niece in 10 years. And I'm making this podcast today because I'm not going to have much time before we leave, and I want to put it up for the weekend. So I'll get this up, then I'll have to go over it. It's some stuff I wanted to talk about. It would be better if I, looked at this and printed it up, and then, the way I write, I don't dictate things and then print them up, but the way I write, I'll write things and then I'll go over it, and different things will occur to me, and I'll smooth it out and stuff like that, and that's much better. But this is a podcast, and so you're just getting what occurred to me as it occurred. Oh, I just must add another thought, pardon me. But, Shunryu Suzuki gave these lectures not to be published as they were. He very much wanted, Richard Baker, Trudy Dixon, other students, to edit them to be for the public or for the wind bell or whatever. And that was the governing principle at Zen Center, actually, until I started sharing floppy disks of his lectures, just all as they were, but only with priests, only with like Steve Stuckey, I was living very near, and he was keeping up with what I was doing. And then eventually the big one was putting his lectures on Cuke.com. And I started doing that in 1999. And that both those things caused a stir with the board and some people at Zen Center. And they gave me certain rules and guidelines, and I accepted them. And one a day, no more than one a day. Well, that's fine. They were probably thinking one a day and then it's gone. But it wasn't. It was keep adding to it. And there was no discrimination. There was no thought of what will help spread Buddhism, what will help spread Suzuki Roshi's teaching, what will be more clear to people. It's an archive. So, I don't know, we should put a warning up on it and tell people, go to Engage Wisdom for, well, they put everything up too. I don't know. It's hopeless now. It's just, the Pandora's box was open. And here's what I envision sometimes. This is normal for the way I think. Somebody says, I've been studying Zen Buddhism. And somebody goes, Buddhism, I've heard of that. And Zen Buddhism? Yeah, it's really good. I really like it. Oh, well, tell me something about it. Well, the best thing you can do is just listen to some of Suzuki Roshi. Let's see. There's quotes from his lectures posted every day, and they're very inspiring. Here, let's see. I haven't looked yet today. Let's see what there is. And then this newcomer doesn't know anything about actually Buddhism or Zen or anything. The first thing they read is you bow to all the officers of seats, whether they're there or not. And they go, well, I hate Zen. I don't want anything to do with that. And for the rest of their life, they have a negative take on Buddhism and who knows what, become a Satanist. So anyway, I think things like that. But it just makes me chuckle. It's sort of like, it's a entrance fee, or it's I mean, if you can't get past this, you're not going to be much as a Zen student. But actually, Suzuki emphasized you would have encouraged them at first. I mean, but actually they didn't do that in Japan. Their temples were go-away places. Somebody come up and say, I want to be a monk. Shut up, go away. But the context of that was Buddhism was the thing that was happening. You'd have some ideas, and it's in your culture and everything, or something. But in America or Europe, you can say somebody just knowing nothing and that being the first thing they see. Okay. So, thank you. And hey, be sure to get your copy of that just released Tatsahara Stories. It just came out. I hope you can find time to read it, and if you approve, to write reviews, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever. Spread the word so that people know it's a rather obscure subject, so that we can get that second one out. Okay? Thanks a lot. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from Johanneshof in the Black Forest, without Doggett Bandita and Feline Manis, who are being well taken care of by Emily and her daughter back in Bali, but with dear lovely Katrinka and the whole Sangha here. We're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.